Morning, Fusion folk. How are you? Would you pray with me? Let now the words from my mouth and the meditations of our hearts and minds be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. This is my last opportunity, I think, to preach during Fusion, so I'm going to kind of take a couple hours, so just settle in. Just know communion will be in a little while, but we're going to tell some stories. We're going to relax. For those who may not know, my name is Jim Connor, and it is a privilege to be part of the wonderful staff here at Genesis United Methodist Church. 5 birthday jokes. How do trees get on the internet? They log in. I have an obsession with wind farms. Really? Yes, I'm a huge fan. What is a tree's least favorite month? September. Yeah, me too. What kind of bow can't be tied? A rainbow. That's not a joke, but that was on there. The last one. What did Obi-Wan Kenobi say to the tree? May the Force be with you. This is an incredible follow-up to in our Choose series, and we're talking about choosing responsibility. And in a week when we celebrate Earth Day, we're talking a little bit about choosing responsibility in terms of how we care for the environment. But we're going to go beyond that a little bit. Most of the Earth Day environmental sermons I've heard over the years have made me feel real guilty. And on a rainy day, I don't want to feel that guilty. But there may be a little of that a little later, and I apologize for it. But we'll hopefully end on a different note. But this psalm, the 8th psalm follows the first 7 psalms, which are all prayers. And then we get to this 8th psalm, which is a hymn. And it's celebrating the majesty of God, majesty of God's handiwork. It's celebrating that God makes beautiful things, just as our wonderful anthem proclaimed. And together we're all part of this good. What is so incredible is to imagine that God who made all the stars, the God who made everything, made all of us. God knows all of the hairs on our head. God knows everything that's going on in our minds and our lives. God knows what you're thinking. And it really is very awesome. And sometimes that's also a little scary. But it is a chance for us to celebrate what God has entrusted us with. In Genesis, we know that God has entrusted us with overseeing the cattle, the land, the earth on which we live, and it really is an awesome responsibility, and that's kind of celebrated here also in the 8th Psalm. And it's a responsibility that I think we haven't really done a very good job of following up on. First of all, just the celebration. Gosh, what an incredible day! I don't know if I love rain. I don't like driving in it. I don't like it when it goes through the roof. But the rain just reminds me of God's nearer presence in a real and profound way. I like the sunshine too, but I love rainbows. But there's something about a thunderstorm and rain that I think can be very refreshing if we let it be that way. I want you to picture for the moment your favorite place you've ever visited, and your favorite place based on the natural surroundings. I want you to think about that for a second. And whether it may be, how many, Grand Canyon, anybody? No one put the Grand Canyon. Seriously. Okay, Barry, thank you. That's a little late though. Mine's Lake Tahoe. I think Lake Tahoe is one of the most beautiful places in the world. Shout out somebody where else that you've seen. No one yelled out Chicago. It's okay. It's okay. But when I think of some of those, especially those natural great resources, the handiwork of God is just so absolutely evident. It's so mind-boggling. It strikes awe. I think of what the psalmist must have felt like on the hillside, looking up at the stars in the sky with no pollution, with no big buildings to ruin that view, and he was so struck that he sat down and he wrote this hymn. I found myself kind of going back in time a little bit somebody wrote about the first picture taken by one of the astronauts of the Earth, and how incredibly life-changing that was for us to see the Earth from the heavens, literally, or at least figuratively. And what somebody who I was talking to about this said was that they had read that almost every astronaut that went up into heaven had a kind of a conversion experience. They felt that they knew God in a much different and a much more profound way, because just of the awesomeness of the world, and just the vastness, the absolute beauty of it. And I started thinking to myself, well, gosh, that must have taken place in 1970, I think, when that photograph was taken. And Todd Treat, who for the last 10 years has given me grief every time I use a sermon illustration that goes back into the last century, let alone into the 70s, I've got a 1970s illustration as well, again. It is Earth Day week, and as we think about Earth Day, my mind goes back to some of my early years. When I was younger, we used to take family trips in a station wagon. We used to drive across the country, and I don't want to think I did this, but I kind of remember maybe having a candy bar, and every once in a while throwing that candy bar wrapper out the window. Confession's good for the soul, and I think I must have done that. I haven't really grieved over it lately. I certainly would if I did it recently, but I must have done that, because certainly there were a lot of candy wrappers on the side of the road. And then I think it was it Lady Bird Johnson who came up with the big anti-pollution stuff? She came up with she wanted to clean up the billboards, and she wanted us to pick up all the trash. And I don't remember that it was her, but there's something I remember like it was just yesterday, and it's haunting. Many of you will remember, some of you who are my age, might remember the commercial of the Native American who is canoeing through polluted waters, and goes up on the shore and pulls the canoe up behind him, and then goes up to a very, very crowded highway. And when he's on that crowded highway, somebody throws a bag of garbage that almost hits him directly. And you see, there's a camera focuses on his face, and there's a big tear coming from his eye. And then the words are something to the effect that people started pollution, people can stop it. William Conrad was the voice in that commercial. I want you, if you haven't seen it before, Google that. Just Native American crying over pollution, 1971. The name of the actor who played that Native American was Iron Eyes Cody. And what still sticks with me that day is the reality that I'm not sure that we live in a cleaner world than we did back in 1971. So I've had 46 years since 1971 to make my effort to try and have things be cleaner, and I don't think I've made that big a difference. And I can tell you with all confession and clearness of mind that I really have tried to be a better person when it comes to recycling. I've tried to use at least one fluorescent bulb. I read somewhere that if everyone in the world used one fluorescent bulb, that it would, if the whole world did that it would be enough to power 800,000 homes. And I thought that was just pretty phenomenal. Many of you know I'm in the process of packing and moving, and it has been fairly therapeutic for me in many ways to be going through some things. And as I go through some things, I'm able to throw out some things. Now, as I'm throwing out some things, there's great joy in being able to throw out some things, but great guilt in that I'm throwing out some things, some that can be recycled and some that can't be. I'm embarrassed by how much stuff I have. And as I'm moving into a new place, I'm intentional about getting a smaller place. And I'm also intentional that I will never, ever, 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 ever have this much stuff again. My garage is packed from one side to the other. I can barely get through it, and I have to because the house is showing. And, if you know what the house would look like if all my stuff were in it, you would know that wouldn't be smart, which is why everything is in the garage. But I bless you. But I celebrate the reminder that gives me that we all just have too much stuff. And it's important what we do with our stuff and how we utilize our stuff for the good of everybody. This whole passage from the Psalm 8 is another reminder of how connected we are. God and the majestic, the awesome God thinks enough about us that God wants to be in an intimate relationship with us. And while that's not awesome enough, then God has also given us the responsibility to be connected to each other, and not just to each other, but to be connected to the world in which we live. One of the scariest sermons I ever heard was from a Duke professor, and she wrote the following: "One day in the fullness of time, all of creation will be given its voice, and we will be called to sit down at a table and listen, really listen, and hear the pain we have caused." I want you to imagine sitting at a table with the mountains and the air and the waters and what they might say to us, what they might say to you. Forget me. What would they say to you about how you're living and what you've done for them, what you've done for the rest of humanity by how you've treated the environment in which we live? It's scary stuff. But what makes it so scary, I think, is that it's so overwhelming. When I was in college, I was dating a nursing student from Cleveland, and that was back, I think, before we got into college. This was in the mid-'70s. I think the Lake Erie caught on fire. We laughed a lot about that. Cleveland, the mistake by the lake. I love Cleveland. I love Cleveland. But they did an incredible job of cleaning up Lake Erie, so much so that Lake Erie became one of the cleanest of the Great Lakes. And it was much cleaner than Lake Michigan, which we Chicagoans lived very close to. And I'm thinking, well, gosh, if we can be that intentional and clean up a disaster like Lake Erie, if we really set our minds to it, couldn't we do more? And I said, well, we could do more, but what about me? What is it I can do? I think that for many of us, we get so overwhelmed by the task in front of us that we just kind of write ourselves off as, well, listen, I can't make much of a difference, so why even bother? And as I thought about that, I was reminded of an illustration that I'd read earlier in the week, that someone else had been overwhelmed by the responsibilities that were placed on her plate and feeling incredibly guilty, and her friend suggested to her, well, read Jesus' story again. Read what he did. Jesus dealt with the people who were right in front of him. He didn't heal everybody. He healed the people that came to him. He didn't feed everybody. Now, he might have helped feed 4,000 and 5,000 at a time, but there were those folks that he was in contact with. And so while we are responsible for this whole earth, and we need to take very seriously our connection with the places in the world that we may never have been or maybe never even heard of, the fact remains that we are absolutely responsible for the houses that we live in, for the community of which we're a part, for the state in which we live, for the country that we're a part of. We are to be responsible and to be accountable in how we live, how we use the resources, the natural resources, and how we give back and how we clean up. Ginger, in the 8:15 service, talked about the news item this week. I think it was Winston Mosley was the name of one of the persons that had been in prison for years for this heinous crime. He killed a young woman named Kitty Genovese, and what made that crime so noteworthy was that as it was portrayed in the media, this woman cried out for help, and no one came to help her. And the newspaper said there were at least 38 people that would have had a chance to do something, and they did nothing. And so this whole news media, there was this whole wave of outrage about these awful neighbors that didn't do anything, and what came to be was this theory of bystander effect, that when we're looking at something, we always assume that the person next to us or somebody else will be taking care of it. We drive by somebody on the road, well, the next car will take care of it. There's somebody who's hurt over there, well, somebody else will take care of it. I've got something else to do. And the truth is that there really were some people that tried to help Kitty, but it wasn't enough to stop what happened to her. Yet there is, again, that feeling that we sometimes excuse ourselves into thinking that it's not up to us to make changes. And if that's what we really believe, then I want to tell us we're all wrong. I think I want to end this a little bit other than with a reminder of our call to clean up the earth, and focus a little bit on what we leave behind by way of legacy. Legacy, in my mind, has nothing to do with our possessions and what we bestow upon future generations. Legacy has everything to do about the relationships that we built. Legacy has everything to do with the connections that we have, and our faithfulness, and our acts of kindness and of love and of forgiveness. When we do a funeral, Ginger and I talk to families, and we ask them what they remember about their loved one. But I think it's kind of neat for us in the here and now to think about how we want to be remembered. Gosh, as I'm getting ready to leave Genesis, I guess I'm kind of even thinking to myself, how do I want to be remembered here? I think I'm going to be remembered here because I happen to have an unbelievable family, and I celebrate that. I think I'll be remembered here because I've been able to forge some incredible relationships with you all. And I think it really is the community we build that makes all the difference in who we are and how we continue to be God's people and who God called us to be. But I want you to think how you want to be remembered. I want you to think about what your legacy is going to be. We can start working on that today, or rather, hopefully we can continue to work on that, things that we've already started. But don't think about it in terms of possessions. Think about it in terms of faithfulness. Think about it in terms of love. Think about it in terms of the way that you utilize the gifts and graces that God had bestowed upon you, and the way that you used your time in a way that truly did make a difference for those that you've come into contact with. Choose to be responsible. Well, I'm not sure what that means for you this afternoon. For me, it means I've got some more work to do in my garage. But the work just can't be with things. We are responsible for each other. We're responsible for the world in which we live. So celebrate this Earth Week by doing some cleaning up, maybe of yourself, but of your house, of your car, of your work, but also reach out and be connected in ways that make a difference. That's what the psalm is telling us to do, and that truly is choosing responsibility. Amen.